All right, guys. So we learned about the National Women's Party a little bit yesterday. Um, it was established on June 5th of 1916. So let's see, Lucy Burns in 1913 and Alice Paul in 1915 is what they're showing here in this picture. And it says women had been working towards securing voting rights since the mid 1800s. Pioneers for women's rights, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, helped future suffragists to their quest to secure an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In March 1913, women held a procession in Washington, D.C., and this is what we talked about yesterday, okay? And this is where the men were just being very ugly. The bystanders, they were throwing garbage, they were throwing bottles. Over 100 women ended up at the hospital needing to be treated for those injuries that they sustained. Um, the women's suffrage procession was organized by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns as part of their work with the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NASA. Following the success of the parade, Paul and Burns had plans for more protests and events. But their aggressive and militant approach to gaining suffrage was in contrast to the Nassau's calmer, more steady approach. Okay, so they end up breaking off to create the National Women's Association because they feel like we need to be ugly. We need to do these things. If people are going to be violent with us, then we need to be able to fight back. Okay, but it goes against what the original um, group believed that they should be doing. So Paul and Burns broke away and created their own party, okay? Paul and Burns established the National Women's Party on June 5th, 1916. They selected Washington, D.C. for their headquarters. Alice and Paul had spent time in England fighting for women's rights and brought some of those tactics used in England to the United States. Her sole focus was obtaining a constitutional amendment to secure women's voting rights. As part of her strategy for success, Paul had financial support from Alva Belmont, a wealthy, well known socialite at that time. The party also used the press to cover their efforts as well as a weekly newspaper called The Suffragist. Okay. With a singular focus on securing the 19th Amendment, Paul and Burns orchestrated more parades, protests, and publications than ever before. Public opinion about women's voting was turning in their favor more every day because it was in their face. Every time you opened the newspaper, every time you stepped out on the street, there was something in your face about women's rights to vote. Okay. And they made sure that it was going to be in your face. Okay. Starting on January 10th, 1917, Paul organized the Silent Sentinels, which was when women picketed the White House for 6 days a week in an effort to pressure President Woodrow Wilson into supporting the suffrage amendment. Although silent and peaceful, the protests to women began. These protests these protests led women being arrested for obstruction of traffic and jailed in horrific conditions. Alice Paul had been arrested several times. While in jail during October of 1917, she went on a hunger strike, and several women followed her lead. In response to the hunger strike, jailers force fed the women. Some never recovered after that abuse. The movement came to a head on November 14th, 1917. What what's come to be called the Night of Terror. Women being jailed in the I'm not sure how to say this Quan facility were subjected to brutality. That means like people are hurting them, punching them, beating them. Jailers grabbed, beat, dragged, and choked and pinched the women. Lucy Burns was beaten and chained with her hands above her head. The jailers left her that way the whole night. Okay. So now this stuff is being um advertised. This stuff is being let out to the public. People are finding out the conditions that these women who are going to jail for obstructing traffic are being hurt in jail. And that is against the law, guys. Yes, obstructing traffic is against the law, but it's also against the law for jailers to mistreat their job. Okay. So these women, when they were released, they were advertising this, they were publishing it so people would know what they were going through. And it angered a lot of people. Okay. Alice Paul and Lucy Burns were instrumental in the fight for women's suffrage. They used political savvy, highly organized events and the sway of the public opinion. They were victorious in their pursuit for the constitutional amendment for the women's right to vote. Following the ratification of the 19th Amendment, Alice Paul shifted her focus to passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. And equal rights would entail like the Civil Rights Amendment. Okay, so it all starts to snowball after the 19th Amendment gets passed. All right, and as we have been going through the last couple of days, this is some extra information for you. Make sure you complete both of these pages and make sure you click the yellow button to share it with me. And if you have any questions, let me know.